Hello everybody, I'm Dr. Somali Gupta, Faculty of English, Government VYT PG Autonomous College, Durg. Today I'm going to discuss Saint Joan, a play written by George Bernard Shaw. This lecture will include the following: the historical background, Shaw's purpose of writing the play, outline of Joan's life, development of the play, and the epilogue. There are four important questions that will help us to understand the play. Is Joan a tragic heroine with a tragic flaw, or an innocent victim of circumstances? Although Joan has our sympathies throughout, why does Shaw go to such elaborate lengths to align us intellectually on the side of her opposition? In other words, why are there no villains in the play? Next question is, if the play is a tragedy, it should have ended with Joan's death. What is the purpose of the epilogue? Last question, does the play fit into the framework of a classical tragedy? Now the background of the play. Saint Joan is a historical tragedy that tells us the story of a French peasant girl, Joan of Arc, who fought British during 100 years of war between England and France. She was caught by the British and was sentenced to death by the Christian Catholic Church to be burnt at a stake in the marketplace of Rouen in 1431. Nearly 500 years later, in 1920, she was canonized by the same church as Saint Joan. Shaw produced his play on Joan's life in 1923. Later, he published it in the form of a book in 1924. Now for the background of the play, the history of the Middle Ages. Regarding the Middle Ages war history, here is some information you need to know. This play takes us to the time during 100 Years' War between England and France, that is the period between 1337 and 1453. There was no king of France for approximately 7 years. King Charles VI died in 1422, leaving his son Charles VII to take the throne. Charles VII is referred to as the Dauphin, that is the title of the oldest son of the King of France, who could not become the king because the town Orleans, where the king must be crowned, was held by the British. Without a central figure of power, the feudal lords, knights, and noblemen gained power in their independent regions. There are only 6 scenes and an epilogue in Saint Joan. The play doesn't follow a typical 3-act structure. In the preface, Shaw begins by explaining first his purpose of writing the play, then that although Joan practiced Catholicism, she was truly a Protestant martyr, an early feminist, and a champion of nationalism. The main reason the church despised Joan, Shaw suggests, was because she challenged patriarchal society and the idea that God spoke through men. In the preface itself, Shaw also made it clear that there are no villains in the play and death of Joan is not a tragedy. The story began while Joan of Arc was a child, still living in her father's farm. She began to see visions and hear voices which were not human, and she was convinced that she was being visited by Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret, and Saint Michael. She believed that they were sent to give her messages from God and that she must obey those messages. She first went to tell the army officers, then the priests, and then the king about the visions and voices and the mission she was commanded by them to carry out. The officers laughed at her. The priests were horrified, and the weak and drunkard king thought her to be a nuisance. The priests thought that the Catholic Church was the only channel through which God communicated and made his will known. Hence they said that the voices heard by Joan must be coming from the devil and were therefore evil. The priests were also threatened by the fact that if they recognized Joan's voices as the message from God, how would they control many others who could come up with similar stories? The Catholic Church was threatened. A conflict arose between individual judgment and institutional authority. This also alarmed the political leaders who realized that if Joan rose, they too would be in danger. Now Joan had two enemies, the church and the British feudal lords. In the play, as a feudal lord, Warwick could not approve of Joan's nationalism, which, if unchecked, would diminish his power. As a ruler of the church, Caution could not compromise with Joan's Protestantism, which, if unchecked, would subvert his authority. To add to her misery, there was also the king, who needed her but disliked her, although she was instrumental in crowning him. Joan was a truly nationalistic hero, and her nationalism grew out of her almost fanatical zeal to save France. Joan's religious enemies were afraid she would break up the unity of the church and destroy its spiritual power in Europe. And with its spiritual power, the political power would also go. Her secular enemies feared that she would destroy their personal power by encouraging people to unite into nations. Quite unconsciously, through her unquestioning devotion to what she believed to be God's will, she became a pioneer of Protestantism in religion and nationalism in politics. Though she was burnt at a marketplace in Rouen on 30th May 1431, when she was just 19, her spirit lived on, and for the good or evil, Protestantism and nationalism spread throughout the world. It is this aspect of her life that interested Shaw the most, and that is why he chose to write a play when he heard about her canonization 500 years after her death. The question to him was not why Joan was killed. He finds perfect justification for it, and that is why there are no villains in the play. But her canonization made him question the credibility of all those who were instrumental in doing so. Defending his case that why there are no villains, he says in his preface to the play, there are no villains in the piece. Crime, like disease, is not interesting. It is something to be done away with by general consent, and that is all there is about it. Shaw justifies the actions of Joan's executioners in the play. He portrays Bishop Cauchon as a man with great integrity and principles. While according to his principles, Joan must die but need not be tortured. He is angry with Joan because she wrote letters to the kings in the name of God. Warwick, a feudal lord, is justified in his seeking Joan's death because she was making the French win battles against the. How does the play develop? The play develops through 6 scenes. Scene 1 opens in the castle of Vaucouleurs, and Captain Robert de Badrico, a French military squire, is scolding his steward for not serving him eggs. The steward replies that the hens have not laid eggs and will not do so till the maid is at the door. Joan is then introduced. She is a confident and positive girl of 18 with a solid built, uncommon face and full-lipped mouth. She tells Robert that she has messages from God to meet Dauphin and demands a horse and some soldiers to accompany her to see Dauphin at Touraine. Miracles start happening at the camp, hens start laying eggs, soldiers behave properly, etc. And Robert is touched by Joan's earnestness to save France. He finally relents and Joan goes off to meet. Scene 2 opens in Chinon in Touraine, where we are introduced to Charles, the Dauphin. He is portrayed as a weak character, drunkard, lacking any valor or self-respect. The others who are there are the Archbishop, Lord Chamberlain, and Bluebeard, and Lee Tremole. The Archbishop insults Charles, saying that it is doubtful that he had any royal blood, but Charles is excited to see Joan and replies that saints and angels do not visit the Archbishop as they come to Joan. They are expecting Joan, who is introduced as an angel who will come and save France. In order to test her, Bluebird poses as the king, but Joan is not fooled. She easily recognizes Charles and drags him by the arm, calling him gentle little Dauphin. She also convinces Charles to give her the command and his forces to Joan. In this scene, we are in Orleans. Joan and Juno command the French army and are waiting on the south bank of River Loire. Juno has a strategy, but Joan is impatient to reach the fort and conquer it. Juno has strategized to attack the fort by water, and his rafts are ready, but they must have the west wind to take them there, as the boats are downstream. They cannot come up against the wind and current. Juno takes Joan to the church to pray, and immediately the west wind begins to blow. That's another myth. In scene fourth, we are introduced to the English camp. There are discussions that witchcraft and sorcery are on the side of the French. They talk about their recent defeat and hear stories about how their soldiers were paralyzed at the sight of the maid. Gosho admits there are supernatural powers on Joan's side and she could conjure fires of hell by witchcraft. He believes that the devil is using her and that she is a heretic and a witch. This scene is important because here we see the argument between Kosho and Warwick and their difference in attitude towards burning Joan on charges of sorcery. Having crowned the king, Joan now wants to attack Paris. She believes that her saints will help her, whereas Dunos is doubtful as they do not have enough inventory. But Joan is adamant. She tells Dunos that she has direct communication with Saint Catherine and the Blessed Michael. They want her to go to the war and free France. She defies Charles and the Archbishop, who also questions the propriety of her voices, whether her voices were really going to help her, whether they were true. Scene sixth, we see that Joan, who went to Paris, has now finally been captured by the British and has been put up in the jail. Now it has been more than 9 months that the maid Joan has been captured. While she is in jail, they try to convince her to seek pardon from God and the church, but Joan refuses. They ask her to tell that she indeed has been in connection with the devil and not heard any voices. But for Joan, that is impossible because she believes that she has been hearing voices. They were not a figment of her imagination. Her trial continues and she is declared a witch, a sorceress, a heretic, condemned to be burnt at a stake. The story of Joan did not end with her burning, and the last line of scene 6 are when the executioner says, "Her heart would not burn, my lord, but everything that was left at the bottom was at the bottom of the river. You have heard the last of her." And Warwick remarks, "The last of her? I wonder." Hence, the epilogue provides the thematic unity of the play. It is integral to the entire pattern of the play and its meaning. It also serves to confirm the historical significance of the play. So the play ends with Joan, ends with her burning. Her heart doesn't burn. It has been thrown off into the river, and yet people are very suspicious that they have still not heard the last of her. Shaw introduces the epilogue after this, which he thinks is very important because it was not because of Joan's tragedy, her death, that he decided to write the play, but it is because of the fact that she was canonized after 500 years. The epilogue opens 25 years after Joan was burnt and deals with Joan's canonization in a dream sequence. To Shaw, it was important to make the readers aware of the history of Joan of Arc. Joan's history in the world ended unhappily with her execution instead of beginning there. But to Shaw, Joan's death was unfortunate, but not necessarily a tragedy. In the preface to the play, he wrote, "Many a woman has got herself burnt by carelessly whisking a muslin skirt into the drawing room fireplace, but getting canonized is a different matter and a more important one." Shaw was writing a tragedy, not melodrama. He said, "My epilogue was a device to include what happened after Joan's death. The rest is a pure chronicle of events." Thus it was necessary to show the canonized Joan as well as the incinerated one as one and the same person. For complete understanding of the tragedy of Joan, the epilogue is important. Shaw was prompted to write the play not after the historical fact of Joan's death, but after the news of her canonization 500 years later, to him that was more important, and through the epilogue he brings back the characters to prove that the world is never ready to accept their saints while they are alive. It is only after their death that we as a human race realize that it was a mistake. Joan's last cry, "O God, that made us this beautiful earth, when will it be ready to receive thy saints? How long, O Lord, how long?" makes us realize that we have failed as a human race, and this is a bigger tragedy than the death of Joan. Thus, Shaw makes it a universal tragedy of human race, and just not a tragedy of a young girl who died. Joan's destiny is not wrecked by a tragic flaw, by a hubris, but because she and those around her were only human beings, and in these Shaw had lost his absolute faith.